San Francisco is the base of one of the Federal Reserve banks. The Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank wants to change the California Constitution and make it into a harmonized segment for the New World Order in the North American Union. Now with the Bush-Obama administration, they have stolen more from the American people in the last 16 months than all the crimes committed at this prison in its entirety, including all the prisons across the United States. The trillions of dollars that they have loaded on the backs of the American people does not match the crimes that have been done here for eternity.
When I was a kid, I used to come here to San Francisco to visit my Uncle John and my Aunt Winnell, and I would look out there at the island. What misery, what horrible lives these guys had. They were like living dead, enslaved. Now, the slaves are out here and the inmates are in charge.
This is property of the Federal Reserve Bank. It is their property, lock, stock, and barrel. It's an obligation of the United States. Who's responsible for it? All persons born in the United States or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Clause 4 of the 14th Amendment, which nobody pays attention to, is the debt of the United States cannot be questioned. It forbids questioning of the debt. So the 14th Amendment, if you are a citizen subject of the United States, you can't question the debt, you pay the debt.
To give you an idea of how much money this is that we're now on the hook for, there are three possible options to pay this off. If I took every single cent of GDP for this entire year and the next 3 years, we could pay it off. Take 54% of all corporate revenues and all of the wages and salaries for the next 10 years. So nobody makes anything. Got it? Or option 3, take 2 out of every $3 of all the wages and salaries paid U.S. residents over the next 10 years.
People think that the economic meltdown is due to toxic mortgages. Well, I have news for you. People have lost at least half of their wealth in the stock market in the last several months. But the wealth was an illusion. It didn't exist. If I go to the bank and I put $100 into the bank account, through the fractional reserve system where they have to keep 10%, they can loan out $90. Now the guy who gets that $90 can put that in another bank and they can loan out $81.
Now wait a minute. Now if I did that, or Gary or Foxy or Ronald here, we'd be in jail.
Exactly.
But for them it's legal.
Yes. First of all, this note was created out of thin air. And it has to be paid back with interest. So I'm going to give you a couple scenarios. Let's say that 1 million of these are created. $1 million of Federal Reserve notes. And actually, they're not dollars. The law says that these notes shall be denominated in dollars. That means they're not dollars. They're called dollars, but they're not dollars. And then at the end of the year, 5% interest has to come back on the million. Well, if 5% has to come back on the million, that's $50,000. Where does that $50,000 come from? It doesn't exist. 1 million plus 50,000 has to come back. It doesn't exist. So more debt is created. They have to loan more of these so that the 50,000 can come back, and you get a never-ending Ponzi scheme. Furthermore,
Wait, this sounds like the whole thing is operated by Bernie Madoff.
Well, actually, it was my wife, who said, "Why don't you go to MIT and hire math people? Because if everything you're doing is related to algorithmic trading and those sorts of things, they're probably the best people." And that was true, but we didn't have much success with the people from MIT. They spent this has nothing to do with the institution, I believe. They spend too much time thinking.
We're going out to Alcatraz in a few minutes. All of the crimes committed by all of the criminals in the history of the United States of America, from day one to the present day, isn't a fraction of what these banksters have done in ripping us off. We now are looking at people who have not only committed bank robbery, but they've stolen your homes, your apartments, your cars, your children. And the most important thing that you brought out in your book is the fact that we are owned by them. They own us because we have the obligation to pay them.
First of all, if I am transacting in this, I'm transacting in someone else's property. If I'm a debtor, I have no rights. I only have privileges granted by the creditor. That's the law.
You're in debt prison then.
Then yes, but
There's no
without
bars out
but
here,
there's
but
no
you're in
bars.
debt prison. Isn't it a fact that we, the people, can never get out of this debt obligation as things stand without the overturning or takeover of the Federal Reserve?
How can you get out of debt when they're creating these out of thin air and charging you interest for their creation? You can't pay it back. There's more debt than there is currency able to pay it back.
Between you guys over there is the guard tower. When the guards were here and the criminals were incarcerated in these tombs, we had freedom in this country. Now, literally, we have become prisoners in our own country. And they have taken everything that we've got, and they still want more. Isn't your book about they want it all?
Yeah, the common law, when you became insolvent, that meant you had no wealth to cover any of your debts. So you were a ward of the creditor, and sometimes you went into a debtor's prison and you were paid for labor in there, and you were released once you paid off the debt. The same thing happens here in the country. However, they've done away with the debtor's prisons. But you do get a birth certificate, and on that birth certificate, you have what's called the mother or other informant. If you understand what the word informant means, it's a penal word. It says that the person who witnesses has witnessed a crime being committed. Well, what's the crime? You had a child that was born in debt. He's in debtor's prison, but there's no cells to contain him. So he's given that certificate, and if you know the nature of certificate, just like that certificate of gold that you had seen, it means there's a commodity attached to it. And the label of that commodity is usually the name of the child.
The Department of Commerce, when it stamps the birth certificate, turns it into a document of commerce. And there's nothing manipulative about it. They just project how much taxes will be collected, and in that projection of taxes, the world powers know the value of a country. And it is used as barter in exchange for all kinds of things at the level of the international bankers and the people who play at the world. And it's done for every country. It's how they know the value of a country.
So we're talking about the children actually being commodities of the Federal Reserve,
Yes.
which is a private entity, right?
Yes, a private entity.
Or a commodity of something, because it's a certificate. Someone owns them.
They own it all, but they is the problem. The question is, what are they doing and how do they do it? And are they fighting among themselves? And if they were not fighting among themselves, we would have been dead a long time ago.
When you have a certificate, someone has title to that.
It's very similar to the prisons. They put a number on somebody here, and this person becomes the inventory of the state, and in the state of California,
And
they
they-
refer to the Department of Human Resources, a resource of the state, not a employment department for the individual.
Well,
human
isn't,
capital.
isn't this more or less like Nazi Germany, in a sense, where everybody was numbered and everybody was tagged?
It's actually worse.
It's worse?
Yeah, it's worse because the prisoners do not know they're prisoners. Going back to that certificate, a certificate is nothing but evidence of a debt. As you know, if you have a stock certificate, you own part of that company, don't you? Some asset in that company. So the stock that you carry, that certificate, allows you to have a portion of whatever that profit is or whatever the terms and agreement of that stock certificate is. The same thing applies to a birth certificate. Where does that birth certificate go? You have any ideas? It goes right to the Department of Commerce. And it's the Department of Commerce that holds that in lieu of the debt that's owed.
We are owned by the international bankers and the Department of Commerce that puts our number up for sale, or up for barter, you could say.
Can they hypothecate that?
It is hypothecated.
And then they create wealth out of your being alive and being a part of their inventory. You're part of their check inventory.
Oh,
that's an
absolutely.
asset to create further debt or to use the debt.
The government has openly admitted that this is going to have to be paid back by our children, and our children